This is Karl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I'm delighted to speak to my colleague Henry Mintzberg of the Des Hotels Faculty of Management at McGill University. Good afternoon, Henry.
Good afternoon, Carl.
So Henry, you just recently you have a book coming out just simply called Managing. And in some ways it summarizes to some degree your thinking of a subject you've studied for 3 to 4 decades now. What is the book Managing about anyway?
It's actually about managing. If I was going to use a subtitle, which we decided we wouldn't, it would be Pure If Not Simple. In other words, it's about managing pure, just managing, period. And it's not simple. The managing's not simple. I don't mean the book's not simple. But obviously, if managing's not simple, the book can't be that simple. But it's basically about the essence of managing. And it revisits my first book, which was published in 1973, to be exact, so it's many decades, which was called The Nature of Managerial Work. I wrote the book so I could find out if I learned anything in all these years, and
okay.
I'll let the reader decide that. So the first chapter is called Managing Ahead, which is kind of introducing the idea that management is a practice. It's more science, it's more art and craft than it is science. And it introduces the 29 people who I spent a day observing as kind of examples and stories that are throughout the book, from a refugee camp, from a symphony orchestra conductor, all kinds of people, everything you can imagine. And then the next chapter is called The Dynamics of Managing. That's much like my earlier book in the sense it's about the harassment, the action orientation, the interruptions, the pressures of managing, much like that book, except in this section on the internet concludes that the internet is not changing management fundamentally. Email, really, we're talking about, doesn't change managing fundamentally so much as aggravate all these conditions and as a result drive a good deal of managing over the edge. Where it just becomes too frenetic and too harassed. So people calling meetings at 10:30 Sunday evening for 8:30 Monday morning, as if everybody's got their BlackBerry on all the time. That's chapter 2.
So is that a call to do away with email?
Is that a call?
To do away with email?
No, I don't think we'll do away with email, but we can do away with all this freneticness for sure.
So if a manager's job, some of us see it as a treadmill.
We can't do away with all this freneticness, but we certainly don't have to take it as far as it's gone.
Okay. What has changed about management over the last 30 years or so that you've been studying it?
Nothing.
So management's the same as 30 years ago, more or less?
100 years ago. What I mean by that is that management's a practice. It's not like medicine when new techniques come along. There are new flavors of the month every month, but they don't make that much difference ultimately. Managing is a fundamental human activity. That's my point. It's not some kind of scientific activity that evolves over time. I think management is basic and fundamental. So the next chapter, the third chapter, talks about a model of managing, and it basically says, managers do act on 3 planes of activity. They act through information, they work through people, and they manage action directly, and that's always been the case, and there's different ways of doing that. And then when you look in the next chapter, which is called The Untold Varieties of Managing, and you look at the varieties among these 29 managers, but it's just in general, you conclude that there's such a range of practice that it's not a question of what's right or what's wrong. And a lot of myths fall down when you start to look at what managers do. For example, everybody agrees that senior managers take the long-term perspective and less senior managers take a short-term perspective. Well, why was Norman Inkster, the superintendent of the RCMP, why was he spending a meeting in the morning looking at last clips with his staff, looking at clips from last night's television news to head off any embarrassing questions in Parliament that day? Is that a long-term perspective? Now, nobody would criticize Inkster for doing that. Is that a long-term perspective? Okay, let's go to Gord Irwin, who's running the front country, so-called, of the Banff National Park. A good part of his day was worrying about the expansion of a parking lot that was causing a lot of grief among environmentalists about the movement of animals. Was that a short-term perspective. So you got a guy at the bottom of this so-called silly hierarchy taking an extremely long-term view of impact on the environment, and the top of a rather big hierarchy worrying about what's happening in question period in a few hours. So all these myths kind of fall by the wayside.
Why did you not call the book Leadership? Why managing? It seems like leadership's more important than managing, isn't it?
Well, I guess the first thing is that I would have trouble keeping my dinner down if I called it leadership. It's kind of like if anybody says leadership ever again, I'm just going to explode. Like it is so utterly and silly, tautological that every problem in the world is solved by leadership. It's like we're children and we need these great leaders to lead us into the promised land. It's just nonsense. I believe in people who have those capabilities. I think the separation of leadership from management is utterly destructive, because managers who don't lead are boring, and leaders who don't manage don't know what's going on. So leadership and management are part and parcel of the same thing. They shouldn't be separated in practice. So this book takes a very strong stand on that issue.
So Henry, you've told us about the first few chapters. What are the last couple chapters about?
Well, the fifth chapter is called The Inescapable Conundrums of Managing. And managing is rife with conundrums, things you just can't get around. My favorite one, I guess, is how do you remain connected when the very fact that you're a manager disconnects you from what you're managing? Yesterday you were a salesman or a saleswoman and you knew all about the products. Today you're managing saleswoman or salesman and you don't know much about the products because you're no longer selling. Or you're chief executive and you're not doing what your company does, which is produce products and sell them, or take out, replace hearts in hospitals or whatever it is your organization does. So that's one of them. Another one is how do you think ahead in this frenetic job? Another one is how do you remain confident without becoming arrogant? That's a fun chapter. And then the last chapter is called Managing Effectively, and it looks at the inevitably flawed manager. What I do is I say, if you want to be a really good manager, get a list of what a really good manager is. And I cite one list that's about 6 or 8 points long, and I say, that's good, but intelligence, they forgot intelligence on this list. We have to add intelligence. So I say, well, actually, they forgot a lot of things. So I say, for the sake of a better world, we need a composite list. So I have this list of about 50 items. And I say, if you want to be a really effective manager, you have to be all 50, even though you wouldn't be a human manager. So my conclusion is that all managers are flawed, but the effective managers are not flawed fatally in the context. And I argue that if you want to find out someone's flaws, either marry them or work for them, and you'll find out very quickly what their flaws are. But you'll also find out, if you're a mature human being, that you can probably live with those flaws. So effective managers aren't flawless. They're people who happen to be right for the situation. So you really have to connect context with managers. Nobody manages anything effectively. They're right for the situation.
I guess it's also recognize your weaknesses as a manager and try to understand that and accept them and let other people help you with them.
Or make sure you're in a job where they won't undermine you.
This has been Karl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I've been speaking to Henry Mintzberg about his new book on managing, which summarizes not only following around 29 managers, but someone who spent 30 years studying management and what he's come to. Thank you very much again, Henry, for your time.
Thank you, Karl.